It seems like every time you turn around, another athlete is out with some crazy injury.
Now,
And not just like the regular bumps and bruises. I'm talking about those totally freaky non-contact injuries,
right.
like KD, Klay Thompson, John Wall.
Oh, yeah.
It just makes you wonder, shouldn't all that training be making them, like, invincible?
You would think, wouldn't you? They're at the top of their game, finely tuned athletes, and yet
And yet we see those injuries all the time.
it's a paradox for sure.
It really is, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Okay.
We're looking at this blog post, The Deterioration of Biological Leg Springs.
Okay.
It's by Clance Layler. He's a master strength coach.
Right.
And he's got some pretty radical ideas about why we're seeing this epidemic of injuries.
He does. He's not afraid of a little controversy.
Not at all.
Layler's argument is that a lot of the stuff we see in modern athletic training, well, it's actually counterproductive.
Really?
Even detrimental, he says, to long-term athletic development.
Wow. And it all comes down to how we treat our biological leg springs, huh?
That's the core of it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. Biological leg springs. What are we actually talking about here?
So it's actually a really good way to think about how your body deals with impact. Imagine like your ligaments, tendons, muscles, fascia.
Right.
It's this whole intricate system all working together.
Like a well-oiled machine or...
Exactly. Or a well-tuned spring. And this system, it lets us move explosively, but, ideally safely.
Okay, I'm with you. So Layler is saying that how we're trending now, it's messing with that whole system.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. And he doesn't mince words, let me tell you. He calls some of these popular training approaches mummifying exercises that are rotting joints. He even compares athletes to cows ready for slaughter.
Whoa! Those are some strong words.
Yeah, he's not holding back.
So what exactly does he think is going wrong?
Well, to put it simply, he argues that a lot of these training programs, they emphasize pure strength
Okay.
over full range of motion. So you end up with these athletes who are incredibly strong in a very limited way,
Right.
but they're also really tight.
I see.
And that, he says, is a recipe for disaster.
It's like building one of those skyscrapers on a tiny little foundation, right?
Exactly.
It might look impressive for a while,
It might, but
but it wouldn't take much to topple the whole thing over.
exactly. Layler actually uses an engineering analogy himself.
Yeah.
He says we should be thinking about building athletes the way engineers think about building bridges.
Designed to withstand way more stress than they'll ever actually encounter.
Right. A margin of safety. Are we building that into our athletes' bodies? That's what he's asking.
That's a good question.
He says we aren't. And those non-contact injuries, those are the price we pay.
So how does this actually play out? Like, what are the training methods that Layler has a problem with?
Well, he calls them delusional methods.
Delusional methods. Okay.
And he points to three big ones in particular.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that a lot of people in the fitness world consider, like best practices.
Right.
But Layler's arguing they're actually doing more harm than good.
Okay, I am ready to hear about these delusional methods. Let's break them down.
All right. So the first one is this idea that you shouldn't train to your full range of motion because, you don't use your full range of motion when you're actually playing your sport.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But it always seemed kind of off to me, Like it's like saying, oh, don't worry about strengthening your whole arm because you only throw with your hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Layler actually backs this up with research. He talks about studies, like one by Hug and Hartman, that found that deep squats done correctly, of course, they can actually help prevent injuries.
Hmm.
And they strengthen the entire lower body, not just, those isolated muscles.
Yeah.
So full range of motion isn't bad.
Right.
If anything, it's actually beneficial.
It makes sense when you put it that way. Okay, what about delusional method number 2?
All right, so this one's all about safety training.
Safety training.
Yeah, which sounds good on the surface. I mean, who doesn't want to be safe, right?
Right.
But Layler's point is that this obsession with safety, it often leads to these training programs that are so watered down that they don't actually prepare athletes for what they're going to face when they're actually competing.
Yeah.
He's got this great line where he says, one of the worst things an athlete can do is prepare for dynamic sports by performing safe conditioning exercises and doing them poorly.
Yeah, it's like practicing your golf swing inside a phone booth.
Exactly.
You're not going to hit anything.
Right.
But you're also not going to get any better.
You need to train for the real world, right?
Yeah.
And the irony is that these so-called safe exercises, they often end up increasing the risk of injury because athletes aren't prepared for those real-world forces,
Totally. So what are some examples of these safe exercises that Layler's calling out?
He lists a whole bunch. But like some of the main culprits are things like quarter squats, half squats,
Oh,
too much stability training on unstable surfaces, like those Bosu balls,
oh yeah.
and an over-reliance on planks.
The Bosu ball thing always seemed a little weird to me. It's like, yeah, okay, I get that it works, you're stabilizing muscles and all,
Yeah.
but when am I ever going to be like sprinting down a basketball court, balancing on a Bosu ball?
It's the perfect example of what Layler's talking about,
Yeah.
this disconnect between training and reality.
Yeah.
And like, it's not that those exercises are inherently bad,
Right.
but they shouldn't be the foundation of your training. Not if you're trying to build a truly resilient athlete.
Okay, that makes sense. And that leads us to delusional method number 3, which I'm guessing has to do with lifting heavy weights.
You got it.
Yeah.
This idea that training heavy will hurt you. But like we were talking about earlier with the bridge analogy, Layler says we need to think about building our bodies the way engineers build bridges.
Designed for that extra capacity.
Exactly. Like if a bridge is designed to hold 10 tons, you don't want to be driving a 9-ton truck over it every single day. You want that margin of safety.
Right.
And Layler points to Olympic weightlifters as a great example.
Okay.
These athletes, they trained with near maximal weights all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But they have some of the lowest injury rates in all of sports.
That's true.
Why is that? It's because they're building that foundational strength, that resilience.
Yeah. You never really hear about Olympic weightlifters getting those crazy non-contact injuries, do you?
Right. It's like their bodies are built for it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about these delusional methods that Layler says are holding athletes back, but what's the solution? What does he suggest we do differently?
Well, the good news is Layler doesn't just leave us hanging. He gives us 4 key takeaways in his blog post that we can dive into.
Perfect. Let's do it. All right, let's hear those takeaways. What's Layler's secret sauce for building these resilient athletes?
His first one seems so simple, but it's huge. Leave your ego at the door and do everything to the full range of motion before loading heavier weights.
Back to basics.
Totally.
Master your form before you start piling on the weight.
Exactly. Build that foundation. And that actually connects perfectly to his second takeaway. Don't go heavy too quickly, and you need to let the body adapt to the new stresses, ranges, and load.
No rushing the process. Okay, I like it. What else?
Number 3, this one really gets to the heart of Layler's message, I think. He says, you are preparing yourself for the stresses of your sport, not to become a professional gym rat.
Don't get so caught up in just looking good in the gym that you forget what you're actually training for.
Right. And, for athletes at any level, that means training your body to be this resilient, adaptable machine, not just a collection of, isolated muscles. Don't lose sight of the big picture, right? Durability over showmanship.
Love it. Okay, what's the final takeaway?
This one brings it all home. Layler says strength training should be used to fill in the gaps, not dominate your training.
So all those other pieces of the puzzle, the speed, the agility, the coordination,
Yep.
those are just as important, maybe even more important than just raw strength.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance, building a body that can handle whatever you throw at it. Layler's message really challenges a lot of conventional training wisdom. It's a more holistic, intelligent approach, I think, one that prioritizes long-term durability and resilience over these, short-term games.
And it makes a lot of sense when you think about all these non-contact injuries we're seeing. It's not just about lifting weights. It's about really understanding how your body works, how it moves, and then building it to handle what your sport demands.
Working with your body, not against it.
Exactly.
And honestly, I think that's a message that applies to everyone, not just pro athletes.
Right.
Whether you're, a weekend warrior or a serious athlete or just trying to move better and feel better in your everyday life.
So true. So for someone listening to this right now, what's the one thing you hope they take away from this deep dive?
I would say be a critical thinker. Question everything. Don't just, blindly follow the latest fitness trends just because they're popular on social media or, your favorite athlete does them. Do your research, listen to your own body, and find what works for you. Trust me, your future self will thank you.
I love that. Be smart, train smart, and don't be afraid to go against the grain a little bit. We could keep going with Layler's ideas all day, but for now, I hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on what it means to train and what it really means to be resilient.